I used to think I knew my mother inside and out. She was the steady rock of our family, always there with a kind word or a hot meal. Mom had this way of making everyone feel special, like you were the only person in the world when she looked at you. But when she passed away unexpectedly last year, I found out there was so much about her I never knew. It all started at the reading of her will. I sat in the lawyer's office, my brother Tim next to me, fidgeting like he always does when he's nervous. Mom hadn't left us much, she didn't have much to leave. Just the small house we grew up in and a few keepsakes. But one line in the will caught my attention. To my daughter, Emily, I leave the contents of the safe deposit box at First National Bank. Please open it privately, and know that I have always loved you. A safe deposit box? She never mentioned anything about a safe deposit box. And what could possibly be in there that required such secrecy? Tim shrugged it off. Probably old family photos or something. You know how Mom was about keeping stuff from the past. But something about the way it was worded didn't sit right with me. The next day, I went to the bank and presented the letter from the lawyer. The clerk brought me to a private room and handed me the small, unassuming box. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, half expecting to find nothing but old jewelry or faded letters. Instead, there was a thick envelope labeled for Emily. Inside were a stack of photos, a small notebook, and a letter. I unfolded the letter first. My dearest Emily. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I've spent my whole life trying to protect you and Tim, but there are things you need to know now that I'm gone. The man you've always called your father, he isn't your biological father. I dropped the letter, my heart racing. This couldn't be real. My father, our father, wasn't my father? I forced myself to keep reading. When I was young, I made a mistake. I fell in love with a man I shouldn't have. He was married, older, and from a very different world. His name was Charles Montgomery. We had a brief affair, and you were the result of that love. I never told him about you. I couldn't. He was a powerful man, and I didn't want his world interfering with ours. So I chose to marry your father, Mark, who raised you as his own and loved you with all his heart. My mind was spinning. Charles Montgomery? That name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then I looked at the photos. They were old, black and white pictures of a man and a woman, clearly my mother, standing together, smiling. The man was tall, with sharp features and an unmistakable presence. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Charles Montgomery was a name I'd heard in the news growing up. He was a wealthy businessman, practically a local legend, and he had died several years ago. Was this real? The notebook was filled with entries from my mother's younger years. She wrote about meeting Charles, falling in love with him, and the heartbreak of knowing they could never be together. She also wrote about her fear that he might find out about me and take me away. I sat there for hours, flipping through the pages, trying to piece together the life my mother had hidden from me. For weeks, I didn't know what to do with the information. Should I tell Tim? Should I try to find out more about Charles Montgomery's family? Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I started researching Charles online, finding articles about his business empire and his family. He had 3 children with his wife, all older than me, and a foundation still run by his descendants. One day, on a whim, I sent an email to the foundation, posing as a researcher interested in Charles Montgomery's legacy. I didn't expect a response, but to my surprise, I got one almost immediately from his youngest son, David. David was polite and professional, offering to meet me for coffee to discuss his father's history. When we met, I couldn't stop staring at him. He had the same sharp features as the man in the photos. We talked for hours, mostly about Charles. I didn't tell him who I was, or who I thought I was, but I kept probing for details. Did his father ever mention a woman named Margaret, my mother's name? Did he have any regrets? David didn't seem to suspect anything, but he did mention one thing that shook me to my core. My dad always said he had one big secret he took to the grave, he said with a sad smile. None of us ever figured out what it was. It's been a year since that conversation, and I still haven't told anyone the truth, not David, not Tim, not even my husband. The box from the safe deposit box is tucked away in my closet, its contents untouched since that day. I don't know what I'm going to do with this knowledge. Part of me feels like I owe it to myself, and to Charles, to find out more. Another part of me feels like some doors are better left closed. All I know is that my mother carried this secret her entire life, and now it's mine to bear. Sometimes, I wonder if she ever thought about what it would do to me. Or maybe she knew I'd be strong enough to handle it. Only time will tell. I couldn't leave it alone. Every time I walked past that box in my closet, it called to me, whispering of unfinished stories and unanswered questions. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the more I tried, the more it consumed me. Then one day, an email arrived that reignited everything. It was from David. Hi Emily. I hope this doesn't come across as strange, but after our conversation, I did some thinking. My father's secret has always been a mystery to our family, and I feel like you might know more than you let on. If you're willing, I'd love to meet again. There's something I need to share too. Best. David. My stomach twisted into knots. Did he suspect something? Was he piecing it together? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. David was already seated when I arrived, a coffee in front of him and a stack of papers on the table. He looked up and smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reminded me of the photos of Charles. I'm glad you came, he said, motioning for me to sit. This has been weighing on me since we last talked. What has? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He slid the stack of papers toward me. They were old letters, yellowed with age, written in elegant cursive. I didn't need to read them to know who they were from. My father, David said quietly. I found these in a locked drawer in his study after he passed. They're addressed to someone named Margaret. Your mother, isn't it? I froze, my mind racing. He knew. I started, but he cut me off. It's okay, he said. I've read them all. I think I understand now. David's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of emotion as he explained. The letters spanned years, starting with when Charles first met my mother. They were filled with longing, regret, and a love that never faded. In one of the final letters, dated just months before his death, Charles wrote, Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to leave this for you. I've always wondered if you told her, our daughter, about me. I've always hoped she'd find me one day. But if not, know that I've loved her from afar. I hope she has your kindness, your strength, and your spirit. I felt tears streaming down my face as I read. My mother had kept these letters all her life, never sharing them with anyone, not even me. You're his daughter, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Aren't you? The weight of the truth was too much to hold back. I nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, we sat in silence, two strangers bound by a man we both barely knew but were forever connected to. I don't know what to say, I finally managed. I didn't know any of this until after my mom died. David leaned back, his expression unreadable. It's strange, isn't it? To think we're siblings, in a way. Half-siblings. The word felt foreign, surreal. I had grown up thinking Tim was my only sibling, but now here was this man, this stranger, claiming a place in my family. Over the next few weeks, David and I met several times, piecing together the fragments of our shared history. He showed me more letters, photos, and even a few personal items that Charles had kept, a locket with a photo of my mother, a journal where he wrote about his regrets. But the most shocking revelation came during our third meeting. My father had a trust, David said, sliding another envelope across the table. It was meant for his children. All of them. I stared at the document in disbelief. It was a legal declaration, stating that any child of Charles Montgomery was entitled to an equal share of his estate. David had already spoken to the family lawyer, who confirmed that if I could prove my connection to Charles, I was entitled to a portion of his vast fortune. The idea of wealth had never appealed to me. I wasn't interested in money or property. But the thought of being acknowledged, of having my existence validated, was tempting. Still, I hesitated. "What about your siblings?" I asked. "How will they feel about this?" David shrugged. "They're not thrilled, but they'll accept it. They knew our father wasn't perfect. Honestly, I think they're more curious about you than anything else." In the end, I agreed to a DNA test. The results came back quickly and confirmed what we already knew: I was Charles Montgomery's daughter. The news caused a minor stir in the Montgomery family, but to my surprise, most of them welcomed me with open arms. Meeting them was surreal. They were so different from the life I'd known, polished, poised, and accustomed to wealth. But they were kind, especially David. Over time, he became more than just a half-brother. He became a friend. It's been a year since I discovered the truth about my mother and Charles. My life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. I've reconnected with a side of my family I never knew existed, and I've come to terms with the secrets my mother kept. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself looking through the letters again. They remind me that love is rarely simple and that the choices we make, however difficult, are often made out of love. If my mother were here, I'd thank her for her strength, her sacrifices, and her unwavering love. Because in the end, she was right. I was strong enough to handle the truth. And now, I feel closer to her than ever before. The journey to uncovering the truth about my mother and Charles Montgomery changed my life in ways I never anticipated. But the most important change came not from the money, the new family, or even the revelations. It came from understanding who my mother really was. One evening, as I sat alone in my childhood home, flipping through the letters and photographs one last time, I found a small note I had overlooked. It was tucked into the back of her notebook, written in her familiar, looping handwriting. "Emily, I hope that one day you'll understand why I kept these secrets. It wasn't because I didn't trust you. It was because I wanted you to live a life free of the burdens I carried. You were my greatest joy, my brightest light. No matter what you discover about the past, remember this: you are loved, more than words could ever express. Always. Mom." I sat there, clutching the note, and for the first time since her death, I felt a sense of peace. She had carried so much on her shoulders, yet she had never let it dim her love for me and Tim. Her strength, her quiet resilience, it all made sense now. In the weeks that followed, I made one final decision. I donated the money I had inherited from Charles to causes my mother would have cared about: shelters, schools, and organizations supporting single mothers. It felt right, like closing a circle she had unknowingly started all those years ago. David and I stayed close, and though the rest of the Montgomery family remained more distant, I felt no resentment. For me, it was never about becoming part of their world. It was about finally understanding mine. One last time, I visited my mother's grave. It was a crisp autumn morning, the leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and red. I brought her favorite flowers, yellow daisies, and sat beside her headstone, talking to her as if she could hear every word. "Mom," I said softly, "I know now that life isn't about the secrets we keep, but the love we give. You gave me more love than I ever deserved, and I'll carry that with me forever. Thank you for everything." As I stood to leave, a sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, scattering leaves around me. For a moment, I felt her presence, a warmth that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I smiled, knowing she would always be with me. This story isn't just about uncovering the past. It's about love, sacrifice, and the strength to face truths, no matter how painful they may be. My mother's life, her choices, and her secrets taught me more than I ever thought possible about forgiveness and resilience. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Stories like these remind us of the complexities of life and the power of love, even in the face of impossible decisions. Before you go, please consider subscribing to this channel, giving this story a like, and leaving a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed your life? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.